So someone in a recent chat asked me, did you hear the National Guard is starting to enforce the quarantine against Rhode Island? And yes, I have. And so I thought this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about the law as it applies to these things as these things are developing. So I'll give you some general rules that generally apply because obviously it's going to get well into the weeds when it comes to this. So these are general things. Your mileage may vary substantially depending on the situation, but let's discuss the law generally as it applies to this. So first of all, the National Guard is generally under the authority of the state governors. So despite the name National Guard, it's not really national. It's state level. So normally the state governor is the one who commands the National Guard in each state separately. And so therefore it is state as in the state of Connecticut or state of Rhode Island or state of New Jersey action. It's a level of the state government versus a national government action. So the first thing is that, Posse Comitatus doesn't apply. The national government has the authority to put the National Guard under the authority of the federal government. So there's a law that says we can essentially transfer it to the federal authority. However, the law also seems to suggest very strongly that if you do that it becomes the federal government just the same as the army. And therefore, if it's the army, then Posse Comitatus applies. Well, what's Posse Comitatus? Posse Comitatus is a law that forbids the Army and Air Force from doing what is called police actions. So essentially enforcing state laws. So they can act inside the United States to the extent they would be engaging in military actions. So yes, can the federal government deploy the army for military purposes within the states? Yes, they can. So, I don't know if someone is invading from another country in New York, for example, can the federal government deploy the army to conduct military operations in New York? Yes. No problem. No problem. We can do that all day long. But what we can't do is do police actions, enforce domestic law. And so quarantines would be an example of domestic law. It's not a foreign invader, so it's not a military action. It would be a police action. Probably. Maybe. Big asterisks here because, again, we'd be in a whole world of analysis. So the first thing is that it's not a Posse Comitatus problem. Then the next thing is, well, is it a problem for any other reason? And there are several different provisions of law that would seem to be implicated by this. The most obvious are Commerce Clause, particularly Dormant Commerce Clause, and Privileges or Immunities Clause of the Constitution. So generally speaking, the state governments can't interfere with interstate commerce. They can't discriminate against where commerce is coming from other states. And there's whole complicated analysis as to when these rules do and do not apply. But as a general rule, they can't put up, barriers and tariffs and trades, and they can't say because these goods are coming from wherever that, we're going to prevent them from coming in. However, that being said, there are some exceptions, and they have had exceptions in the past. For example, I believe the state of Hawaii has in the past and may currently, and I believe some of the islands in Florida in the past and may have currently had inspection stations for flora and fauna. To check to make sure that none of that stuff is coming in except through authorized channel. Is that legal? Yes, it is. Because, if you allow non-native species to invade, it becomes a real problem. So yes, they can have these inspection stations and be generally illegal. If it's coming in through authorized channels, through shipments and whatever, that's fine. If it's coming in through a person carrying it in their luggage, not so much. So yes, you can have these kind of inspections. Second thing that comes to mind is both for this and the Privileges or Immunities Clause. There's not much of the Privileges or Immunities Clause left of the original Constitution because it was killed in a case called the Slaughterhouse Cases, which to this day I generally despise and think was wrong. But yes, one of the very few things that is still breathing and living is the fact of right to travel, state to state. So all the sovereign citizens out there who say, I have a right to travel. Yes, you're correct. You don't have a right to travel by car, or plane, but you have a right to travel. So yeah, you can walk. And you say, well, what good is the right to walk? I'm like, well, I don't know. Ask someone in 1790 when they didn't have cars and didn't have planes and didn't have trains. So yeah, you can, travel by horse or travel by car or travel by foot. So, if you want to travel, there's generally a right to travel. Okay. So it's can we interfere with those rights under quarantine law? Well, my answer to that question is probably yes. And we covered reasons why in a prior stream on a prior U.S. Supreme Court React. We covered some laws from the early 20th century in which, for example, the state of Louisiana put in a quarantine for all ships for the entire state. And it was a German ship, as memory serves, that was trying to come in, or no, maybe it was Italian. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. It was a ship trying to come in and trying to dock in this, and Louisiana said no. The U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, that's okay, because it's health and safety, and they're putting in place these quarantine laws. So, all else being equal, I would assume, big asterisks here, that these rules that are being put in place by the state governors are legal. So when they put in these quarantines and are saying we're going to have the National Guard check to do the quarantines because they're state authority, so they're essentially just police. So they're police. So we're going to have the National Guard check them and see whether they're New York plates or New York IDs, and if so, we're going to quarantine them. The first thing that comes back to mind is I'm running back to those cases we covered in the prior Supreme Court React from 1900 dealing with these quarantine authorities. Can a state have quarantines? Yeah, probably. Can they discriminate on the basis of where those people are coming from? Well, to the extent that those are based in some sort of health-based knowledge, I would think yes. Okay, is there a particular reason to discriminate people coming from New York? Yeah, at the moment there is. It's I don't need a whole ton of analysis to say oh, why am I discriminating against people from New York? Oh, that's right. That's why. So can I do that? Probably. Now, again, a big asterisks apply here because, we're in a whole world of complicated legal analysis. But, I would imagine, all else being equal, that as long as it's being based on, prevalent medical scientific knowledge, which it is, and as long as they're doing it for those reasons, which they are, if they're checking people coming in through the borders of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island's National Guard is checking people and saying, hey, you're a New Yorker, you can't come in, and or we're going to force you to quarantine, and or whatever. Probably legal. Yes. I would imagine. Now, do I know that for sure? Of course not. Do I know that someone's going to sue someone? I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. I'm sure there will be interesting court cases dealing with the interference of people's right to travel under Privileges or Immunities Clause, under Dormant Commerce Clause, under all kinds of interesting provisions. But, my very, very cursory understanding of this is I go back to those cases from the 19th century or 20th century, which say, yes, you can have a quarantine. Yes, you can have mandatory vaccinations. We can mandate you vaccinations. Yes, we can do this for public health and safety. So as long as it's being done for a genuine health reason, as long as it's being done by the state government, not the federal government, then yeah, probably. So, now when Trump was talking about doing some sort of national level quarantine, I don't know what that even means. But again, I presume that he probably can. He probably can because the Interstate Commerce Clause has been interpreted, because remember, I was just saying how these are 1900, 1905 cases. I was just saying that just now. The Commerce Clause has been adopted since Wickard v. Filburn in particular, which I think was 1938, which basically says that the federal government can regulate interstate commerce and non-commerce, and to any extent they want. So, I would just imagine there's a law somewhere on the books that gives the Department of Homeland Security, Department of whatever, the authority to institute quarantines and to do it under federal law. Then it becomes an issue of how the federal government enforces that, because how do they enforce that rule? I don't know. That's a good question, because the federal government doesn't have that many police. I mean, they could use the FBI, I guess, but there's not that many FBI. And even if they conscripted all of federal law enforcement, they just randomly get the DEA and whatever else, federal law enforcement they can find, and just say okay, congratulations, you're now doing this, which I assume they can do because they're all federal employees. So they probably can do that. There's probably not enough. So then the big question is, can the federal government use either the Army or the National Guard to enforce these things? Well, Posse Comitatus comes immediately to mind. We're running a smack dab into huge Posse Comitatus problems. Congress could authorize it, because Posse Comitatus is just a statute. It's just a statute that exists. So like Congress could just like repeal Posse Comitatus. They've done it once before. So, they could do that. Or they could they could do that. But would Congress in this current environment do that? Do you think that the Congress would pass a rule that says, yes, you can do this? Probably not. I'm imagining not yet. At least we're not quite in that level of panic state where I see the Congress doing this with that yet. So can you do it? Without that, who knows? Who knows? But Posse Comitatus would apply if Trump tries to do it. But if it's the governor of Rhode Island trying to do it, then we're just in a privileges or immunities, dormant commerce clause, and a whole bunch of other stuff analysis. My assumption is probably okay. If Trump tries to do it, well, we're in a whole world of pain. So I'm sure that the White House lawyers informed him of this, and it's probably one of the many reasons why he didn't do it. Because it's like, yeah, we have a problem here, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. So, and we already know that Trump can't commandeer the state authority, so he can't order the state government to do it because of Prince v. United States, for example. So he can't like commandeer state police to do this. So he can't make the state police do it. Can he make the National Guard do it? I don't know. If he orders it, we're off to one hell of the races, guys. Yeah, it would be interesting, but as long as it's just the governor of Rhode Island or just the governor of New York or just the governor of Florida who's doing it, who's screening these people, checking for people, forcing quarantines, probably legal. Asterisk, 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 because we're going to get into all kinds of very big issues, but when I look at the law, probably okay. That's what I would say initially. Yeah.